Well, I don't exactly think this is breaking news. Burnout is a reality, but a lot of people don't realize how severe it actually is. COVID-19 making things a lot worse when we were all working from home and we couldn't get out. Even worse is people struggling to switch off. Because let's be honest, come COVID-19, a lot of the working conditions has changed for people because we were all connected online. We were on our phones, on our laptops, doing more than we ordinarily would. But the problem is there are no labor laws specifically targeting long work hours, overwork and tight deadlines. Well, let's hear now from a legal expert. It is Professor Karin Calitz from Stellenbosch University, a law professor there joining us. Professor, good morning. Good to have you with us as well. And I understand that there's a call from your side to try and create, if not a legal framework, at least some kind of business framework that can allow us to switch off our emails and our WhatsApp messages and not get yelled at. Good morning. Where's the idea coming from?
Good morning. It actually comes from Europe. And it started in France when an employee refused to take a file home and to work after hours. The employer dismissed him and he went to court, and the court agreed with the employee that he has no duty to work after hours. And then in 2016, France adopted legislation, the so-called right to disconnect, and many European countries followed after that. So they have this right to disconnect, which means that after hours you don't have to answer your email, you don't have to answer phone calls from work, and you have your family time, your personal time, which is very important for a work-life balance and for a healthy lifestyle.
Because I'm not sure if you would agree with me, Prof. Tell me if you do or you don't, but I do feel for those who work, and I mean it respectfully, 9-to-5 jobs, more corporate positions as well. Everything changed during COVID-19 because there was panic from every angle, and I think everybody was scrambling and doing what they can. And because we were now working from our phones and from our laptops, we lost any sight of what work hours were. So I think it's even worse from COVID-19, isn't it?
You're quite right. The International Labour Organization did a study. They reported in 2020, and the results were that COVID-19 exacerbated burnout, and especially for women, and more specifically for young women with children, but also fathers with young children. So burnout is taking on epidemic proportions in most countries in the world, and South Africa is no exception. In surveys in the UK, well, that was already 2 years ago, and the numbers are growing. It indicated that more than 40% of employees in Britain in that study suffered from burnout. In the United States, it was even more. And a 2-year follow-up study also showed that this was much worse than previously. People are just, the line between work time and personal time became blurred with digital communication, and it even was worse during COVID, as you've said, and the International Labour Organization confirmed.
Let's talk about what a framework or some kind of national code could look like. Could this go as far as being put into law, Prof? Because I'm just trying to figure out here in South Africa, how would we do something like that? How do you begin to have discussions that could result in, for example, a law where you are required to disconnect, as an employee, but as an employer, you are barred from contacting staff who do work more regular hours? Do we have a way of putting that into our law in this country?
Yes, I think it will be easier to adopt a code of good practice, and some countries have done that. France adopted legislation to require employees to sit down with require employers to sit down with their employees, the trade unions, and to work out a code for the specific workplace. Of course, there's a national code giving guidance on this, but each workplace has its own requirements and peculiarities. So they have to sit and they have to adopt a code, otherwise there will be penalties. So I think something like that could work in South Africa for a code of good practice being published. That's easier than adopting legislation, which is a very long process, and for employers to require employers to adopt such a code. And in such a code, there could be specific rules for the specific workplace, because, as you said, not all people work 9 to 5. So different work milieus will have different requirements. So that's why it's important to sit down with the employer and the employees and to devise a code for that specific workplace.
Just very briefly, Prof, in your last question, as I say goodbye to you, but if it is only a code or a national code or some kind of reform and it isn't law, I suppose it's still open to interpretation and I suppose still open to abuse as well. Just a last brief answer from you, please, Prof.
Yes, that's true. A code is not binding, but we've seen with other codes of good practice that the courts really take this into account. So should an employee go to court and try to enforce or to bring a case against an employer who, for instance, gave them a lot of work so that they have a high workload and they burned out, the court will certainly take such a code into consideration and say, well, here is the code. What did you do, employer, about this code? Did you stick to the code, or what is the situation here? So that will give an employee some foot to stand on when they bring a case based on the common law, because our courts have said that employers have the duty to protect employees in the workplace, to ensure a safe workplace, not only physically but psychologically also.
Professor, it's going to be a fascinating debate, and I'm sure we're going to use it as a viewer question as well, being able to switch off to avoid burnout in South Africa. I really appreciate you joining us this morning. Stellenbosch University Law Professor Karin Calitz.